Recorded. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm super excited to have you here. My name is Lisa Danylchuk. I'll introduce myself again in a moment, but welcome to this beautiful Wednesday in California, Wednesday morning free workshop. I'm super excited to share these things with you. My life and heart has been deeply steeped in this work, so I'm excited to meet some of you for the first time, to see some of you again who are familiar faces. And today we're going to talk about 3 essential tools for healing trauma that we can all use right now. Now, I know some of you in here are therapists, mental health professionals, some of you are yogis, some of you work in other health professions, or you're just interested in your own personal journey. I think that's fair to say for all of us that we're interested in our own personal journey, especially after the last year that we've had. So as we go through, you might be thinking about yourself, you might be thinking about those you serve. I'm going to offer some tools that are straight up for you today. You can practice them along and you can share them when and how you're ready. All right, so we're recording. If you get bumped off, if anything technical happens, if I get bumped off, I'll be right back. But we'll just not get stressed about tech today. We'll lean on the recording if need be, okay? So my first invitation to you does have to do with tech. My brother Mike got all the tech genes in our family. But one thing I know for myself is I can get super distracted when I'm online, right? Even if I'm on a webinar. So if we sit, meditate, we do yoga, have these practices, one of the main purposes of those is something in yoga we call dharana, right? Focus, concentration, or a single pointed focus. So I'm going to invite you to try to use this time together to really hone in your attention, right? So that might look like turning off your phone or turning it down, closing out tabs, putting this in a full screen, turning the volume up, or putting your earbuds in if that helps. Now, I know a lot of us have been home for a long time and it can be kind of chaotic, right? So if you have puppies, like I literally did yoga this morning and I have puppies like chewing up my hair in Shavasana, so I get it. It's not that easy, but to the degree that you can, focus in and be here now. All right, as Ram Dass said. Now I want to introduce myself to you. I know some of you quite well, and some of you are new to me and I'm new to you. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about you as well. My name is Lisa Danylchuk. So that's a Ukrainian last name, just means son of Daniel. It's more common over there than it is in here. If I have anyone in here from the Ukraine? I have a neighbor who's Ukrainian and she heard my last name like, oh, of course, Danylchuk. So we all have places where we feel familiar, right? I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, also an experienced registered yoga teacher and yoga teacher trainer, mostly through YogaWorks, where I've worked for probably started in about 2000, working with them. I've also written 3 books, all about trauma and yoga and something else we're going to talk about today. At the end, I'm going to be giving away a copy of my most recent book, Yoga for Trauma Recovery. So stick around if you want a free copy of that. We'll ship it straight out to your house, pretty much anywhere in the world. Some places it takes a little longer, but we can get it there. I also founded the Center for Yoga and Trauma Recovery. Now that's here in Oakland, California. We've been mostly virtual even before the pandemic, but still maintaining primarily virtual these days. So super nice to meet you and spend this time with you today. I want to be clear about what we'll cover so you know what you're going to get. This is our agenda for the day. I'm going to share, as the title suggests, 3 what I think are the most essential tools when we're working with trauma and our intent is healing. So we'll start with just the general umbrella, right? So you have a sense of that. And then I'll offer some specific skills. That's where we'll have a little bit of opportunity to practice and to think about how we're working with people, with our own bodies, with other bodies, with humans. Then I'll talk at the end. I know some of you have asked a lot of questions. I have an 8-week program. It's starting June 14th. I'll talk all about that towards the end, I promise. And then we'll give a book away, okay? Maybe even more than one, so we'll see. All right, so let's move on. I almost wanna see if you guys can guess, like what what would you say, you can put it in the Q&A box, is the most essential skill for healing trauma? Now, I know that's super general, so it leaves it wide open, but down at the bottom of the screen, there's a little Q&A function, and you can put into the chat what you think might be important. So, gotta massage my contacts a little bit here. Giving choice, invitations, safety, yes. Okay. Anything else? Spot on for sure. Processing, okay. Forgiveness, yeah. Compassion, all of these. See, you guys have a lot of wisdom here too. Maybe we'll make it a Zoom meeting next time and we'll talk a little more open. So I think a lot of the things that you guys are mentioning are folded into what I'm about to share, which is resourcing, okay? So resourcing is something that, in my experience in the mental health field, is often overlooked or sort of sidelined or thought about after. Even outside of the mental health world, when we're trying to help someone, I guess we have some inclinations to go towards resourcing, but sometimes we also feel like, oh, we really have to find out what happened to them, or we have to get into, they have to process the hard feelings. Not that that's not true, but I really think resourcing is what allows for that. And I'll explain a little bit more. So what is resourcing? Well, for me, I was just a Memorial Day weekend. It's my grandma passed last year in 2020. I love her. She lived to almost 105. She's amazing. But we would always spend Memorial Day weekend out in Long Island with her. And for the first time in decades, at least a decade, of consistent visits to Long Island on Memorial Day weekend, I wasn't there and I was sad. And so, it's Memorial Day weekend. You want to honor the people who serve. Those of you in the States might be familiar with the holiday. But I just needed to get outside. So I went with a couple friends, 2 friends, out to Squaw Valley, Tahoe, and immersed myself in the mountains. It was beautiful. It was inspiring. I was also sad and thinking about Long Island and thinking about my grandma all weekend. But I was really feeling supported by this environment, right? I think it would have been much harder if I had stayed inside and been on the computer like we do most of the time now for the last year and a half. Right? So nature can be a resource. I can think of examples with every resource I'm going to give you of where it would also be a trigger. So I just want to say that now. If someone had been lost in the outdoors, for days and not found for weeks, I wouldn't show them this picture, right? We would find their resources. Another thing that could be a resource, and especially we may have become more aware of this in the last year, is being with people we love, and gathering, whether it's a concert or a birthday or a dinner or something along those lines, right? So that's definitely true for some of us. This goes a little bit to introversion, extroversion, but most of us need some degree of both, some combination and manifestation of both. We may also really need time alone to reflect, to connect, maybe to read or garden or just sort of be in our own space, right? We've had maybe a lot of that. And sometimes being in our own space can feel comfortable, but can also bring up a lot when we're going inward, right? If we are using our me time that way. So these are some examples of resources. Let's back up a little bit and just define, well, what is resourcing? So a resource in this psychological context is an experience or a relationship or an aspect of the self, this part's important, real or imagined, that supports the client or person in accessing positive biopsychosocial states. So that means your body, your mind, your connection with other people feels positive, feels good. Resources can be neutral sometimes, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So it also is something that can assist someone with coping with challenging emotions or experiences. So earlier I said, a lot of people talk about processing with trauma, which is absolutely important. But the more bolstered up we are when we go into that processing, the more likely we can sort of feel it to heal it, as the expression goes, right? So resourcing are practices. Resourcing is just using practices that help people develop their psychological resources, that help people develop these experiences, relationships, these aspects of themselves that could be, any of these could be real or imagined, right? So these things connect them to those supports and those positive states during times of stress or before or after, right? So you can resource right now. And I'll give you a couple opportunities to try that. Okay, so again, if there's like a puppy chewing on your hair, do your best. I get it. But let's take a moment just to orient. Orienting is. I couldn't hear what you said. Oh, Siri, I was not talking to you. That's funny. Oh, it's 11:11 though. 11:11 in California. Make a wish. Okay, I love making wishes at repeating numbers, especially ones. So maybe that's a resource for you, right? Seeing a number on the clock and just feeling like you get to make a wish. But also orienting to something neutral or positive in your environment. At the time, I use plants on my desk a lot. Now, I chose this photo in particular because there's a few different things going on, and you can use this screen or you can use something in your physical environment. Either one could work. But for me, when I look at a physical plant, I know there's this oxygen, carbon dioxide exchange. I love nature. Might not be true for everybody, but there is a whole school, won't go too much into this, a whole school of ecopsychology where when we separate from nature, that's kind of like an initial trauma, right? So we are connected to the earth, it's our home. So as long as it feels neutral or positive, you could look at the plant, you could look at the weave on the basket, or even something neutral, well, as long as there's not too much symbolism in here, perhaps the cross on the window, just the angle. And if I don't call it a cross and I call it a square, that might feel different, but the corner of the square on the window, any of the colors or the shapes on the pillow. And we just choose something in this photo or something neutral or positive in our environment. And we take a moment, I've got my little plant over here too, to look at it, to take an easy breath if that serves you. And to just, like I said in the beginning, bring all of our attention in, that single pointed focus, a smooth, easy breath if that helps. And there are some practices. Closing your eyes is a big thing, especially when we're talking about trauma, but there are some practices that say if you prefer to close your eyes and envision that thing right in the center of your forehead, that's another way to kind of build mental resilience, neurological resilience, more than anything, more than even those terms, to self-regulate, right? If you're feeling like you need that. So take your moment, take your breath, pick your thing, and just notice how a simple moment can create even a slight shift. Okay. Now imagine if you were to practice that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or repeatedly throughout the course of, say, a therapy session, right? If your therapist had this plant on the window and you just happen to love it, and every time you look at it, it gave you a little sigh of relief, that could be a great resource. So orienting is one tangible skill to something neutral or positive that helps us resource. Another thing, I mentioned feeling very distracted by technology these days. If you have kids, if you have puppies, if you have a brain, if you have a life, if you have biology, if you're human, you're probably going to feel scattered sometimes. Totally normal. So similar to what I just mentioned with this area of the forehead, we can use the thumb to third eye, or even a little bit lower, right in between the eyebrows. And if it serves, 3 slow breaths. So I'm going to say a little more. You can kind of set yourself up for that if you'd like to practice along. This point is also an acupressure point. It's called yin tang. And it also helps to calm anxiety and worry. So if we're feeling scattered, it does a million other things in traditional Chinese medicine, and that's not my specialty, but I have learned from some other professionals. So there's a lot of ways to do this. You can put your thumb here, kind of right in between your eyebrows or on your third eye. The point itself is more in between your eyebrows. There's like a little notch there. You could put a quarter or a stone. You don't have to use your thumb. You can use any finger or any object. So let's just try that if it's accessible to you, if you're not driving or doing something else right now. Just to press lightly and take a few easy breaths, if that serves. Of course, we can always add kind of visualizing things, releasing to the degree that it's comfortable with each exhale. I like to kind of rub my forehead too, because I see myself scrunching it all the time too on the computer screen. Yeah. So another super simple resourcing skill. Now, those of you who have been through trauma therapy or who have offered trauma therapy, think about the things we've been doing and how gold those would be in the moment if you've practiced them a lot and they're tools and they're skills and there's repetition. And then someone goes into what we might call an abreaction or a trigger and gets really overwhelmed. If someone's moving towards panic, if someone's going into a memory or dissociating in a way that feels like too much or we're trying to work with, these skills can really help in the moment, right? They seem like, oh, small, I've heard it before, I do this in yoga class. Yeah, because it's helpful, right? So let me give you one more, and I love this one. And I get that this could be when we're talking about histories of, especially severe abuse or neglect. When I say think of a time you felt deeply loved, it might just seem like I'm totally missing the mark, like what's wrong with this woman? But we can feel deeply loved by a lot of things and in a lot of ways. I mentioned nature earlier. Some people feel really loved and supported there. This is really unique to each person. But I brought this picture in because it's often, for those of us who are adults, sometimes it's easier to connect with animals than it is with other people, or for some people, this could vary for sure. It's easier to connect with children, right? You see, like this happened to me. I live not far from Amma. Some of you know the hugging saint. She goes around and hugs people, not in 2020, but in other years. And I live near her ashram in Castro Valley, and she just goes around and hugs people. Anyway, story is I was in line to get food, ran into another yoga teacher there, as it happens, not part of the story, but there was a baby in front of me. The baby was so cute. And I just started, oh, hi, how are you? Oh, you're so wonderful. You're so beautiful. And then I looked at the adult holding them, and we do this, right? We see animals on the street, dogs usually, or a pet that we love, and we go, oh, I love your pet. But it would be a little socially strange in most cultures, I think, if we just walked up to that adult and said, oh, look at you. You're amazing. You're so beautiful. Look at those eyes. Oh, look at your cheeks. You're so great. Oh, you're so smart. We just don't do that, right? So, point of the story is, I had a little moment of awareness there of like, wow, we really love on babies. It's easier to love for a lot of us on animals. I certainly love on animals a lot, and I do this in my online training too. So if you have like dog trauma, it might not be the best fit for you, heads up. But we can use these moments as feelings of connection, feeling deeply loved, or feeling a feeling of love in our bodies. So I'll invite you now to think of a pet, or a small child, or a beautiful place in nature, or anything that brings a sense of presence, of care, of love to your own heart. And then if it's comfortable, you can close your eyes. If it's comfortable, you might place a hand on your heart and just feel into that. Like I'm thinking about spooning my dog, Iris. I just feel so much love with her. But see if you can, in this moment, and this is powerful, and this could even shift your day after this webinar, even in subtle ways. Subtle things are powerful. See if you can just let that expand a little, that feeling of love. Maybe there's someone in your household that's like grinding on your nerves. No, never. If it's too much to go there, come back to the puppy or the young person or the place in nature, but you might be able to expand that love a little bit further. and to include yourself as well. Okay, so this is just a little taste. Let's take one more breath there. And you can find things, this is, I think, one of the reasons we look for, there's actually a lot of science behind why this is good, but I'm not getting into all that today. But I think this is one of the reasons we love puppy videos and cat memes and things like that, is it just connects us to something that feels warm and fuzzy, quite literally, but also can give us a sense of care and connection and love without everything else attached. All right, so we'll move on from there to the second essential skill for healing trauma. At first, I was thinking these are all tied for first, but I think they kind of are. But I do feel like going into our own trauma work or working with other people, rooting ourselves in resourcing is a really safe bet. Now, the next thing I'll share is context, okay? So what context does this person, this human, I'm assuming, trauma can happen to animals too, even though they also have lots of coping things that they do that we don't always do. We can look to them as teachers. We can also help them in other contexts. So what context does this person exist within? Now, this is from my most recent book, Yoga for Trauma Recovery, Chapter 10. This is Bronfenbrenner's model. I'm not going to put you to sleep. I'm not going to stay here forever. It was like a whole semester of grad school. Just talking about the different systems that people exist within. So there's, the most close to us, there's bigger systems, there's the way those systems interact with each other, right? There's so much built around us. You don't have to follow this model, but something like this diagram where there's circles, it could get even more artistic and more creative, thinking about what experiences, what environment, social, emotional, physical, political, all of that, what environment is the person in? So looking at the context. Now, beyond all of the sort of physical, mental, emotional, social context, the basic context, and this one's so important, that we can understand or seek to understand how whatever symptoms a person is experiencing were actually a functional response, at some point at least, that served to try to keep this person alive. So if someone's experiencing anxiety or panic even, or dissociation, or intrusions even, right? Like a memory that keeps coming back when they don't want it. There's something in there, right, that teaches us, right? And if someone's feeling really tense, they're bracing, right? There's something in there that's seeking to protect. So if we can look at those around us, at ourselves, and try to understand how is this response or this symptom, this challenge I'm having, in what way did it, or maybe does it still, serve me? How does it keep me alive? How does it protect me? And we're really looking for the mechanism and the function there, rather than just saying, oh, you're anxious, let's calm down. We say, oh, you're anxious, why? What happened? Right? And so this is a little clip art of someone who, might have different moods, or in a grander scale might have sort of different identities or states that are separating from each other. Why? Why might that happen? And we can know a lot going in. Like if you studied this stuff before, you probably already have ideas about why that might happen. But it's super important to also stay curious, right? Because my experience working with people is, I'll get a brilliant idea and then it'll be something so unique that even I or they could have, EMDR is really good for this too. Even I or they would never have thought of it consciously, but it ends up coming up, okay? So context, what happened to you? Now, I love that Oprah and Bruce Perry, Bruce Perry once presented at a conference at the same time I did in Berlin, and I was so happy that people came to my presentation too, because I wanted to go to his. But Oprah and Bruce Perry are, right, they've published this book, and there's a lot of stuff I think if you follow either of them on social media, they've been kind of sharing. And I think there's I started watching, I don't know what streaming service it's on, but a show as well that's all about context, all about what happened. Why are these symptoms here? How can we understand this person better? Now, I didn't want to put anything, and this is upsetting enough as it is, but I didn't want to put any extreme examples of abuse on here. So very mild, I suppose, trigger warning. This is just an example of how it's a kid in a classroom crossing his arms, and there's a chalkboard and a hand with a ruler, right? Now, not that long ago in my parents' lifetime, and maybe in your lifetime, kids were smacked on the hands in school. There was corporal punishment, right? It was accepted. Now, we could make up a story where someone was then afraid to open their hands or to close their hands or to do the thing that was connected with that punishment. And in that way, it makes so much sense. I'll give another, I like to give examples that aren't too heavy because I think we get enough of that already, but an example in my EMDR training, which is a form of trauma processing for clinical trauma processing, for those of you not familiar. In my EMDR training, Laurel Parnell, who was my trainer, beautiful person, talked about how one of her clients had a fear of fruit. Okay, so you might have ideas. Why would someone have a fear of fruit? Maybe they had to eat too much of it as a kid, they got sick of it. Well, what it turned out to be, and they figured this out with EMDR, was when this person was young, they slid down the slide on their stomach and their sister or sibling came over and bit them on the butt. So it wasn't the fear of fruit, although that's what the person showed up to therapy saying. It was the bite. The bite triggered something in this person's body. So they were able to resolve that through EMDR. So what happened, right? What's the experience that connects to this symptom? Now, I am a huge advocate, and you might have gathered this just from us starting with resourcing, on thinking about also what's right with you. So if you've got someone and they're saying, hey, I've got this symptom or this problem, let's look at what's adaptive, what's right with the symptom, right? And let's also look at this person's strengths. Let's look at what they've done really well, how they've protected themselves, how they've persevered, how they've stayed alive, and just the beautiful things they are that are totally separate from the traumatic experience, right? Whether they're musical or they're funny or they're introspective. People have personalities even when there's really, I know it's harder to differentiate when there's really early trauma, but people have strengths and skills and beautiful aspects of them aside from that and within that recovery. So I think it's super important that we look for those and we highlight those. Yeah. So you can even do that right now and think, okay, what's right with me right now? Maybe I'm a little frazzled, maybe I'm a little tired, maybe XYZ, but I'm also a really compassionate person, or I'm funny, or I'm strong, right? And it can be more detailed as well. So let's just workshop this a little bit and think about how a behavior might have functioned to protect someone at the time of or immediately after a trauma. So I'll use some general examples for this one. You can think about, if it's not too much, yourself or people you've served. So here's a picture of someone in full gear with a mask and a face shield on, like a superhero with their arm up in the air. If we saw this in 2019, maybe I might be like, what's going on? Is this person going into toxic outer space or what? But now we look at it and we can say, oh, this is someone fighting COVID-19. This is someone protecting themselves. It makes sense. They're protecting themselves with a face shield. They're protecting themselves with the mask. They're protecting themselves with the gloves and the whole gear. It's all the way up into a helmet, right? So we look at what's being presented to us, minimal information in this case, and having the context of the recent pandemic, of the ongoing pandemic, really, we can understand, oh, okay, this is what this makes sense, this fits. Okay. So a really common example with post-traumatic stress and trauma is something we call hypervigilance. It's like that startle response, that being kind of amped up. So someone's scanning, looking around, jumping, right? Looking to identify danger. And they're doing this, for context, to prevent something awful from happening again. So my father was in the Vietnam War. One time he was at my grandma's house in Long Island. Love you, Grandma. And actually lightning struck a tree in the backyard. I'm not making this up. And there's more story to the tree, but I don't have time for it today. It's a beautiful tree. My parents brought it from California. It's a redwood. Anyway, so it was taller and lightning struck it. And so he woke up, figured it out the next morning when he went outside, what had happened, went about the business of cleaning up the tree and all of that. But he noticed himself feeling really stressed and really tense. And he was like, well, am I sad that we lost this tree? I mean, everyone's okay. The house is okay. It's actually not a big deal. But he eventually put together that it was the loud crack of the lightning, something he's not heard that close before, that was so similar to being in combat, that was so similar to the explosions, that he was having a somatic, a very visceral reaction, right, to having heard that sound. So our bodies are really smart and they want to prevent bad things from happening again. So they'll go on guard to try to make that happen. Does it always work? No. I mean, can my dad's body tensing up stop lightning from striking? No. Can it stop war? No, but it might be able to keep him alive in those contexts, right? So we look at this image here, a little graphic of someone looking right and left, and there's question marks and exclamation points, and they look maybe confused, right? Or maybe anxious or hypervigilant if we're looking through that clinical lens. But they're also, in my eyes, potentially scanning, right? And looking for safety, looking for a way out, looking for threats, looking for what might cause harm again. And in the example I gave earlier of the fruit, like it doesn't always have to be a big thing. Sometimes it's a lot of big things that happen over our lives, but it doesn't always have to be just this one. It doesn't always have to be something that we think, oh, wow, that's really traumatic. Like having a fear of fruit because someone bit your butt when you were 5, like, and this person didn't even remember it. So our bodies are really attuned in this way. Okay, so let's think of another one, a skill in the context of dissociation, right? So if someone is dissociating in any spectrum of that, they might be numbing to prevent really extreme pain, or to give time to get to safety before they start processing, or to find a safe person, ultimately to stay alive. So I've seen some memes as dissociation gets a little more mainstream, which I'm super happy about, as we start to talk about it more and include awareness of it in yoga and other settings. I saw a meme that was sort of felt dissociation shaming, right? And I was like, no, like this is a response that helps us survive some of the most atrocious, like I won't even go into examples on this, some of the most atrocious abuse, right? So this helps us stay alive. So here's a picture of a young woman laying in bed, and then there's sort of a more transparent image of her getting up and looking at herself. So there's two of the same person, one's apparently sleeping and the other one's sitting up and looking down. So this disconnection, and a lot of times people who experience abuse say, well, I climbed up into the wall and I watched, or I floated above my body. That keeps us safe from experiencing the pain. Okay, so there's an adaptive reason for it. Super important to understand that. Okay, so let's move on to the third essential skill for healing trauma. So just to recap, because we've covered a lot of stuff, it's 3 things, but there's a million mixed in there, right? We've talked about resourcing and we've talked about context. So resourcing as a skill, understanding context as a skill. The third should not surprise you, as yoga for trauma recovery is my endless passion, is to include our bodies. Doesn't have to be yoga, but I'm going to talk about yoga mostly right now. So we resource, we understand context, and we include our bodies. Now the word soma means body, somatic, involving the body. Now there are titles out there like The Body Keeps the Score, The Body Bears the Burden, these trauma books that have been in the field for years and years. And we go to them to understand trauma. And they talk about how our bodies hold the burden of the trauma, the score of the trauma. And sometimes they also talk about how our bodies hold information and resources too. So there's a lot of wisdom. It's one of the reasons I love this kind of tree image. This on the right, you'll see, and if you can't see, I'll describe. There's the kind of a black and white drawing of, looks like a female figure. It could be a person, we'll just say a person, whose feet have roots going into the ground and whose head has branches and leaves going out to the sky. So we take in information from the outside, we hold it in our bodies, and that could be resources, that could also be memories and experiences of trauma. So what does it look like to include our bodies? I'll give some yoga examples. We talked about someone feeling hypervigilant a moment ago. So if you had someone come to a yoga session or a yoga class with you, it might be as simple as like letting them look around. I had a therapy session once where I was thinking and I was kind of doing this and looking around, which I do. I like to look and think. And the person was like, no, right here. Actually, this happened to me twice. Can you look at me? Can you look at me while you're talking? And I was like, I can, but I don't feel like I need to. And I wasn't even necessarily super hyper vigilant at the time. I was just sort of like thinking. But I think it's great to just let people look around. There's probably a reason for it, right? If someone keeps looking at the door, maybe they want to know it's there and it's unlocked and they can get out of it, right? If someone's squirming around, we can support them in settling if it looks like they're uncomfortable, but maybe it's just okay to squirm a little bit, right? And maybe as yoga teachers or people supporting them, we can help direct some of that energy if it feels like it'll be helpful. But the most important thing is that we're cultivating a sense of safety. So if someone is looking at the door and we say, don't look at the door anymore, they might get scared, right? Well, then I don't know if I can get out. So definitely think about the cause and the effect here. But the door and safety in the room are, I think, really key when we're talking about yoga spaces. And as we start to move back into physical spaces, there's actually a little different context with Zoom land, right? And just being online. Some people don't have a safe space at home, which is one problem. But there's sometimes more safety if you can turn off your camera and kind of be in your own space. So some of us are still working in that capacity. But as things change, as we move back into physical space, we can look at here how closing the curtains might bring a sense of privacy if there are people walking by, opening them if there's a nice view or good light could help. For some, same thing with the door. For some places, keeping it cracked a little so someone can come in and out easily, or at least making it visible from where people are on their mats can be super helpful. If there's a lot of noise, if there's people outside, closing the door can feel more protective, right? So it's not an all or nothing, always close the door, always open the shades. It's more about safety. What's going to make you and the people in the room, probably more importantly, both important, what's going to make our bodies feel safe. So when someone's dissociating, and this is just a wonderful sample body art. What am I trying to say? What do you call it? You trace the body and then you fill it in. It's an art therapy practice. There's a name for it. Oh, if you know it, put it in the chat or in the Q&A. But when you have these big tracings and you fill in the body, I find them very telling, because like we could go into a big conversation with the person who made this. This one's just a sample, but what do the color in the legs mean? What's going on in the solar plexus? What's happening up in the eyes and in the arms? But what we don't see when we look at a room full of people practicing yoga is everything that's actually going on inside, right? We don't see that they might feel numb in certain areas or disconnected or hyper connected, and some might be really loud and some might be really far away. But this is just true for the general public. So if we can recognize and appreciate the function of that disconnection and really slowly, in a really paced and safe and invitational way, start to explore some of the areas that feel numb, right? And this is more processing, so we can always go back to resourcing with grounding or orienting. But we can start to explore, especially in a one-on-one therapeutic environment, like, well, what happens if that, let's just say someone has like heat in their hand or tension in their hand. Okay, well, what if we ground and feel that support and then start to feel some of that and move back and forth? These are skills that are kind of beyond the scope of this webinar, but we can very slowly cultivate a relationship within different areas of the body, within our bodies and minds, within ourselves. We can cultivate that relationship anew, or we can cultivate that relationship again if trauma disrupted it. I know I'm talking a lot about dissociation, and some of you might be like, what is that? And I have some workshops on it and talk a lot about it in other settings, but I know some people have just heard the word and have seen it happen or have had it happen to them. So I apologize if we're not going into the full definition of that, but I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down here. So here's another example for someone feeling overactivated or hypervigilant. We might practice Tadasana, right? Where they can see. So one of the things I've done with some folks is something called the sun salute around the world, where you just change direction each time, right? So you can see all four corners of the room. You could also invoke resources for protection, something that feels like maybe hands over the heart, or imagining an invisibility cloak. Remember, these resources can be imaginal as well. Now, if we're thinking about bodies in yoga, including our bodies with yoga, child's pose is something that a lot of classes start with, right? Let's just start, come into child's pose. And if we know the person or the group in front of us has a pretty complex trauma history, it might be great. I know plenty of people, tons of trauma, love child's pose. But especially if I didn't know that person, I probably wouldn't start there. And I'm wondering if you can guess why. And if you have an idea, I'd love to hear it in the chat. I'll give you a second because I know sometimes there's a little moment of delay. Why might it not be good to start? Oops, let me go back. To start in child's pose. Okay, let me pull it up. Back of the body exposed. Yeah, right. Even your neck. I mean, back of the body exposed. Vulnerable, back is turned away. Yes. And what's really vulnerable? Exposure, vulnerability, right? You're kind of bent over. Yes, all of these. You also can't see. And I know there are folks out there who don't see on the regular, right? If there's any kind of visual impairment or issue going on, then that's probably not your primary mechanism of keeping yourself safe, right? But it's one of the biggest, like, sort of things that takes up space in our brain, movement and our visual processing. We get so much information through our eyes, even more than we're aware of. Our brain is filtering out so much information all the time. And if someone can't see the rest of the room, especially if there's other people, if they can't see you, like, just imagine you're going to a new class and it's someone's teaching and they want you to start in child's pose. You don't really know them and they're like sort of standing there and you're in child's pose. There's like an inherent power differential, right? So maybe not there. So another example that I'll give next is, to just be seated. But when someone's overactivated or hypervigilant, another thing about starting in child's pose is it's the opposite of where their nervous system is in that moment. And we think you're stressed, you're anxious, calm down, forward bend, child's pose. But think about a time where you were really overactivated. Does it feel really easy to go into that, deep forward fold? Maybe if you've been doing yoga for 20 years, I know some of you have, even more. But for some of us, like, we need something else first. So we give something active. We give something like Tadasana, sun salutes around the world. Okay, I could go on about this stuff forever, but I've got to move on because we're getting closer to time. Okay, so we include our bodies through yoga. For someone feeling disconnected from their body or dissociated, we might give something seated, right? We might give something that's just supportive, grounding. Now, I really like offering, like this person here doesn't look particularly dissociated. He's got a wall behind him, a blue wall, blankets under his hips, palm on palm. There's contact with the floor. So this is just to give examples of different points of contact we can use to focus and come to the present. Again, it's grounding and orienting, kind of either or, depending on how you frame it, right? But someone might be gently reclined if they're really in a overwhelmed state, or they're having, if they have kind of issues with tonicity in the body, you might just support them so there's not as much effort needed. This is someone's really depressed or collapsed, in a collapsed state. But you could also support with the wall, have these very tangible contact points, use hand on hand if that's okay, use foot on foot, body on prop, like we did earlier, thumb on forehead, just finding these single pointed foci, these single pointed opportunities to focus and physical support in the present moment can be really strong, okay? So these are just a few examples, and you can tell I love to nerd out on these, right? So I do have, obviously, like I said, I'll talk about the 8-week program now. Deeper dive, we start June 14th. It's an 8-week program. You actually have 12 weeks to complete it though. In terms of what the program looks like, because some of you have asked about this, I'm actually going to do an info session next week too. So we'll dive into all of this and all the guiding principles of each week. But just to give you the bird's eye view, we start talking about health, resourcing, remember? Then we move into trauma. Then we move into somatics and our nervous system. Then we move into yoga philosophy and practice, building on all of this, how it all connects together, weaving together the whole time. Week 5, we talk about trauma-informed principles. Week 6, we go more into dissociation and shame and more advanced concepts. Week 7, there's a research review, and then you'll have a research project. And week 8, there's a practicum assignment. Okay, so this is where you get to practice what you've learned on yourself with a loved one or with a student. So that's the 8 weeks. Who's in the program? Yoga professionals, that could be teachers, studio owners, teacher training directors, could also be mental health providers, psychologists, social workers, counselors, lots of folks like that. We also have some just allied health and healing professionals, Reiki, massage, nurse practitioners, things like that. Now, we don't have a requirement that you have to have a counseling license or a yoga TT. Most people have one of those. And we do talk about scope of practice quite a bit in here, okay? So you can use the information within your current certification or license, but you do need to be mindful to not blur those boundaries. A lot of people ask, like, who are these people in this online program? Where will I ever see their faces? We do have community calls for each group. We have 2 live community calls, and you get pretty much lifetime access to the community calls. So here's Tara. She did the program in 2015. She's hopped on community calls lately. She started when she was working for a nonprofit and doing a lot of individual yoga sessions. And then after Y4T, she created Bloom Healing Yoga. You can actually go to her website now. She has even more amazing resources, taratonini.com. But she started a program for survivors of intimate partner violence and sexual assault. She's also an acupuncturist in training. She's also a Reiki master. She's just badass. Tara Tonini. Here's Noreen. Noreen's from the Philippines. She came to Y4T and she would tell me that she was like, I don't know if I can do this here. Nobody cares about Nobody knows about trauma. People don't want to talk about mental health. There's no trauma-informed yoga here. And then she realized, like, okay, I'm the person. I'm the trauma-informed yoga person here. And she's really positioned herself as a leader in the local trauma-informed yoga movement. She's found some connections and offered training and teacher trainings and on her own and beyond. She's stellar, Noreen Nikolic. I'll tell you one more. Shailene, she is out of New Jersey. She had a DBT, actually still has a DBT psychotherapy clinic, and she really wanted to build out the yoga program to serve her clients. Now, what she's doing now is training and consulting with local studios to help make trauma-informed yoga more accessible, not just to her clients, but to the entire community. So she actually started a new business called Rebelmente, where she's consulting with people to try to just build more trauma-informed awareness. And I love that in her biopic, it says, "I am not afraid. I was made for this," Joan of Arc. So that's Shailene's lovely face. So for the summer session, we start June 14th. We go for 8 weeks. And if you're interested in this, I know some of you might be the first time you've heard about it. We have a really deep dive info session that's also free next Wednesday, same time, not same place, different link, but online. So we'll do an info session next Wednesday, June 9th at 11 a.m. Pacific. I will send out the details for that in the follow-up email to this. Okay, so if you want to register for that, you can. And if you want to get into the program, you can go to howwecanheal.com/Y4T and fill out the application there. So on that page, all the information about the program's there. At the bottom, there's an application. You can complete the application. If it seems like the program is a good fit, we'll send you an invitation to enroll. Now, I'll give you a heads up right now. Applications that have one-word answers, unless they're really powerful words, don't usually get a response. Applications that, another thing we look for is if you're really just focusing on your own healing, I'm sure you could get a lot out of this program, but we want to be clear that this is for providers. And as a provider, you're a human. Yes, you're going to be thinking about yourself as you go through the program. But if you're someone who's like in the throes of trauma, something really traumatic just happened last week, last month, or you're kind of reeling from it, this program is more for the people helping you, or maybe way down the line for you, but it's not, I think it's just too much information about trauma, and that in and of itself can be a little bit, can stir the pot, right? It can be a little triggering. So if you put a lot of your own, if that's what you're looking for, we usually will give people different resources if that's in your application. Okay, so we covered a ton today. 3 essential tools for healing trauma: resourcing, putting current challenges into context, or if we want to call them symptoms into context, and including our bodies. Notice I don't say the body. We say the body. I still say this when I teach yoga: the hand, the foot, the body. It's a little bit like, like a little bit disconnecting, right? So I'm trying to use our bodies, your body, my body, so that it feels more alive and more in the room. And then we covered the Y4T 8-week program. Okay. So time for a book. Time for a book. Who wants a book? These are my 3 books. First one is Embodied Healing, Using Yoga to Recover from Trauma and Extreme Stress. That's 2015. Second one is all about resourcing. The whole book is about resourcing. So if this is a new concept to you, I highly encourage you to get this book. You might get it if you enter the raffle in a moment. But it's How You Can Heal: A Strength-Based Guide to Trauma Recovery. And then 2019, Yoga for Trauma Recovery, Theory, Philosophy, and Practice. This is the final book, baby. I finally got all of the stuff that was brewing out. Felt a real sense of completion after this, and I'm really proud of it. I think it's got a ton of resources. So I'm going to be giving away a copy of Yoga for Trauma Recovery. So go ahead and pull up that Q&A box again and write your email address in, or your first name and your email address, please. And then I'm going to pick a winner. I have a number in my head. I'm going to look around for a moment. The lovely plant on my desk and the trees outside. And then when I come back, oh my goodness, scrolling sometimes is the bane of my existence. Something about the arrow keys on this computer. Okay, we have, oh, I love love it when I get a harder one to pronounce. Nonkululeko, Nakuli, am I saying your name right? I hope so. I'm really sorry because I can't say my name right trauma too. Nakuli, you are the winner of Yoga for Trauma Recovery. So in the Q&A box, we won't make them visible, so I'll just be able to see it. Write your address. You can also email it to lisa@howwecanheal.com if you feel more comfortable, but please give us your address, your shipping address, and we'll send you a copy of the book. Now, everyone who put their email address in, and I'll be able to gather all of that after because again, I can't scroll. Oh, yay, Jamie, Susan, hi Susan, Sarah, hi Marta, Rosemary, oh, I love you guys, yay, yay, Nikuli, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Everyone who put their email address in, I'm going to send you a PDF copy of How You Can Heal. So hopefully that'll really drive home the resourcing concept. What I love, and maybe you'll love about How You Can Heal, is it has its resources, but based on yoga and the chakras throughout. So familiar framework for those of you who teach and work in that way. So if your email address is in here, I will ship you. That's cute. I'll email you a copy of How You Can Heal. And yeah, and then we'll ship out the physical copy to you, Nikuli, later on. Okay, so I do just want to say one more thing to close, two more things to close. The first one is please just keep caring for each other. It's hard times out there. I think care is one of the biggest solutions to everything that we're going through. If we can care for ourselves, we can continue to care in a healthy way for each other. We can look at pictures of goats and pigs snuggling. We do what we got to do just to keep feeling the love. And the last thing I want to say is just thank you for your interest in healing. Every person out there who's doing healing work is helping. It's making a difference. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but sometimes I wish we could just turn on the news and see all of your beautiful faces on there and all of the amazing work that you're doing. So thank you for that. And I want to send each of you a lot of love. I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful day. And I'm going to go full face just to say bye. Wait, is it working? Stop share. There. Bye. Thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you again, maybe next week or in whatever capacity. Bye, everybody.